I woke up to autumn leaves scratching against my face, and the unmistakable smell of burning coal drifting through the air. The park bench beneath me was different. Older, more worn than I remembered. My smartphone lay dead in my palm, its screen reflecting nothing but my own confused expression. Washington Park looked wrong, like someone had stripped away years of modern additions and left only the bones of what I knew. The trees stood taller, the paths narrower. Cars from another era rolled past on streets that seemed almost familiar yet impossibly distant. Then I saw the calendar posted on a nearby building, October 15th, 1975. My heart hammered against my ribs as the reality crashed over me. I was no longer in 2024. Somehow, impossibly, I had crossed more than just state lines. I had crossed decades. The panic lasted only moments before survival instincts kicked in. I needed shelter, food, answers. But first, I needed to understand this world that felt like a museum exhibit come to life. Downtown Spokane stretched before me, smaller and grittier than the revitalized city I knew. The buildings looked younger, their facades unmarked by the renovations that would come later. People moved differently too, slower, more deliberate, their clothes carrying the unmistakable stamp of an era I had only seen in photographs. I was studying a vintage car when the commotion erupted near the old Carnegie Library. Two men in dark coats had cornered a woman against the brick wall. She was fighting back with fierce determination, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light as she swung her leather satchel like a weapon. "Help! Someone help!" Her voice cut through the autumn air. Without thinking, I ran toward them. The woman's blue eyes met mine for one desperate second before she drove her knee into her attacker's stomach with surprising accuracy. He doubled over, cursing. "Get away from her!" I shouted, grabbing a fallen branch from the sidewalk. The second man turned toward me, but the blonde woman used the distraction perfectly. She smashed her heavy ceramic mug against his temple. Both attackers stumbled away, disappearing into an alley between buildings. She leaned against the wall, breathing hard, her white blouse torn at the shoulder. Blood trickled from a cut on her lip, but her eyes blazed with undiminished fire. "Are you hurt badly?" I approached slowly, branch still in hand. "I've had worse." She dabbed at the blood with the back of her hand. "Thank you for stepping in. We should get you cleaned up. Is there somewhere safe nearby?" She studied me with curious intensity, as if trying to solve a puzzle written across my face. "Margaret's Cafe is just around the corner. She'll have bandages and won't ask too many questions." The cafe was small and warm, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and yesterday's bread. Margaret Chen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands, fussed over both of us like we were wayward children. "Audrey Powell, what have you gotten yourself into this time?" Margaret cleaned the cut on the blonde woman's lip with gentle efficiency. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Audrey's voice carried a stubborn pride that resonated somewhere deep in my chest. "This is..." Audrey paused, realizing she didn't know my name. "Evelyn Moore." The lies came easily, born from desperate necessity. "I'm new in town, looking for work in textiles." "A weaver?" Margaret's interest sharpened. "Morrison Textiles has been looking for skilled hands." I could put in a word. Audrey's eyes never left my face during the conversation, searching for something I couldn't name. When our fingers accidentally brushed as she handed me a cup of coffee, electricity shot up my arm. She felt it too. I could see the surprise flicker across her features. "You're not from around here," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "No. I've been traveling a long time to get here." Longer than you could possibly imagine, I thought, watching the way candlelight played across her determined features. Something told me that helping her fight off those attackers was just the beginning of whatever strange journey had brought me to this moment, this place, this woman whose eyes held secrets that matched my own. Margaret's introduction worked like magic. Morrison Textiles occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of downtown, its high ceilings echoing with the rhythmic clacking of industrial looms that seemed primitive compared to the computerized equipment I knew from 2024. The supervisor, a weathered man named Frank Morrison, examined my hands, with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades in the business. "These calluses tell me you know work? When can you start?" "Tomorrow morning," I replied, trying to hide my amazement at the simple wooden shuttles and manual tension controls that would be museum pieces in my time. The boarding house where I found a room was a 3-story Victorian structure with thin walls and thinner mattresses. But it was clean, affordable, and most importantly, it asked no questions about my mysterious past or lack of references from this era. I was settling into my sparse room when a soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw blonde hair catching the hallway light. Audrey? She stood in the dim corridor holding a canvas bag, looking somehow both confident and uncertain. I hope you don't mind me tracking you down. Margaret mentioned where you were staying. Not at all. Please, come in. My room was barely large enough for a bed and a small table, but she moved through the space with the grace of someone comfortable in tight quarters. She set her bag on the table and withdrew several skeins of deep blue wool. I have a commission that requires someone with real skill. The client wants traditional weaving techniques, but with patterns that feel different, revolutionary even. I fingered the wool, its quality far superior to anything mass-produced. What kind of patterns? That's what I was hoping you could help me figure out. She pulled out a sketch pad, her fingers stained with charcoal and paint. I work primarily in pottery and painting, but this project demands textile expertise I don't possess. The sketches took my breath away. Her designs were decades ahead of their time, incorporating geometric patterns and flowing lines that wouldn't become popular until the late 1980s. Without realizing it, she was channeling artistic movements that hadn't been born yet. These are extraordinary, I whispered, studying the complexity of her vision. Really? Sometimes I feel like my imagination runs too far ahead of what people are ready to see. If only she knew how prophetic those words were. I think I can help you bring these to life, but it will require some unconventional techniques. We spent the next hour discussing thread counts and pattern structures, her enthusiasm infectious as we leaned over the sketches together. Every time she gestured, explaining her artistic vision, I caught glimpses of the passionate intensity that had helped her fight off those attackers. You see things differently than most people, she said suddenly, looking up from a particularly intricate design. What do you mean? The way you study these patterns, like you understand something about them that even I don't fully grasp yet. Her observation was dangerously perceptive. I needed to change the subject before I revealed too much about my impossible knowledge of future trends. Would you like some coffee? It's not much, but I have a hot plate. I'd love some. As I prepared the coffee, she wandered around my small room, examining the few possessions I had managed to acquire. When she picked up the thread samples I had been experimenting with, her painter's eye immediately recognized the unusual dye properties. How did you achieve this color depth? I've never seen anything quite like it. The truth was, I had used a synthetic dye process that wouldn't be developed for another decade. Instead, I offered a vague explanation about trade secrets learned during my travels. She accepted the coffee cup, our fingers brushing in the exchange. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. The small contact sent warmth racing up my arm, and I saw her pupils dilate slightly in response. Evelyn? Her voice was softer now, more uncertain than I had heard before. Yes? When you helped me yesterday, when you ran toward danger instead of away from it, I knew you were different, special. Audrey. She set down her coffee cup and stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of turpentine and clay that clung to her clothes, close enough to see the small scar above her left eyebrow and the way her blue eyes darkened when she looked at my mouth. I don't usually feel this comfortable with strangers. Neither do I. The admission hung between us like a bridge waiting to be crossed. She reached up slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, and touched my face with paint-stained fingertips. Is this okay? Instead of answering with words, I leaned into her touch. She smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face, and then her lips were on mine. The kiss was tentative at first, questioning, but when I responded by threading my fingers through her blonde hair, she pressed closer, deepening the contact with a hunger that matched my own. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. I should probably go, she whispered, but made no move to leave. Probably. She kissed me again, briefly, then stepped back and gathered her sketches. Same time tomorrow? To work on the commission? I'll be here. After she left, I sat on my narrow bed, touching my lips where the taste of her still lingered. In less than 48 hours, I had traveled across decades and found myself falling for a woman whose artistic vision somehow bridged the same impossible gap in time. Whatever forces had brought me to 1975, I was beginning to suspect they had brought me exactly where I needed to be. The next evening, I climbed the narrow staircase to Audrey's studio apartment, my heart hammering with anticipation. The building was old, its wooden steps creaking under my weight, but something about the aged character felt more real than the sterile efficiency I had known in 2024. Her door was painted deep green, with small splatters of various colors marking where she had tested paint combinations. Before I could knock, she opened it, as if she had been waiting by the window. Perfect timing, she said, stepping aside to let me enter. I just opened a bottle of wine. Her studio was a revelation of organized chaos. Canvases lined every wall, some finished, others half completed. Pottery wheels occupied one corner, while easels and paint supplies claimed another. The scent of turpentine mixed with clay, and something uniquely her, created an atmosphere that felt both creative and intimate. This is incredible, I breathed, turning slowly to take in the scope of her work. How long have you been painting? Since I was 15. Pottery came later, when I realized I needed something more tactile. She handed me a glass of red wine, her fingers lingering against mine. Most people think it's too cluttered, too chaotic. Most people don't understand that chaos can be beautiful. She smiled at that, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and made something flutter in my chest. Exactly. Come here. Let me show you something. She led me to a corner, partially hidden by a hanging canvas. Behind it, tucked away like secrets, were a series of paintings unlike anything I had seen in the rest of her studio. These were figure studies, but not the classical male forms typical of art classes. These were women, soft curves and strong lines, painted with an intimacy that spoke of more than academic interest. I don't usually show these to anyone, she said quietly, watching my face for reaction. I studied the paintings, seeing not just technical skill but emotional truth. The way she had captured light falling across a woman's shoulder, the tenderness in hands, touching skin, the vulnerability in eyes that seemed to look directly at the viewer. They're beautiful. Honest. Honest. She repeated the word like she was tasting it. That's exactly what they are. What I am, I suppose. The admission hung between us, and I understood we had moved beyond the safety of artistic discussion into something far more personal and dangerous. Audrey, I said softly, turning from the paintings to face her. I know what you're thinking. In this time, in this place, women like me keep these feelings hidden. But something about you makes me want to stop hiding. She set down her wine glass and stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her body. Women like us, I whispered. Her breath caught. Us? Instead of answering with words, I reached up and cupped her face in my hands, thumbs tracing the sharp line of her cheekbones. She leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering closed for a moment before opening to meet mine with startling intensity. This time, when our lips met, there was no hesitancy. The kiss was hungry, desperate, filled with all the longing we had both been carrying. Her hands fisted in my shirt, pulling me closer as she backed us toward the small couch near her easel. We fell onto the worn cushions together, never breaking contact. The taste of wine on her lips mixed with something uniquely her as our mouths moved together with increasing urgency. Her hands found the buttons of my blouse, while mine tangled in her golden hair. Are you sure? She whispered against my neck, her breath sending shivers across my skin. More sure than I've ever been about anything. What followed was a revelation of touch and taste, of whispered names and gasped pleasure. She explored my body with the same attention to detail she brought to her art, finding every sensitive spot and committing it to memory. When I returned the favor, mapping the curves and valleys of her form, she arched beneath me with abandon that took my breath away. We moved together in the lamplight, years of loneliness melting away in the heat of connection. The outside world disappeared, leaving only the sound of our breathing and the soft murmur of endearments spoken against skin. Afterward, we lay entwined on the narrow couch, her head on my shoulder, golden hair spilled across my chest. The studio felt different now, transformed from a workspace into a sanctuary where we had discovered something precious and fragile. That was my first time, she said quietly, tracing lazy patterns on my arm. With a woman, I mean. Mine too. The lie came easily because the truth was too complicated to explain. She raised her head to look at me, studying my face in the soft light. No regrets? None. You? Only that we waited this long. I laughed softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We've known each other exactly 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is long enough to know. Her voice carried a certainty that made my heart race. Sometimes you meet someone and realize you've been waiting for them your whole life. The weight of her words settled over us as we held each other in the quiet studio, surrounded by her art and the lingering warmth of our connection. Outside, 1975 continued its slow march toward a future I had already lived. But in this moment, wrapped in Audrey's arms, time felt suspended. The next morning at Morrison Textiles, I stood before the ancient loom with fingers that carried the muscle memory of machines that wouldn't exist for decades. What I was about to demonstrate would either make my reputation or mark me as dangerously different. Frank, watch this tension technique, I said, adjusting the warp threads, in a pattern that would allow for multi-dimensional weaving. His eyes widened as I began threading a color gradient that created depth impossible with traditional methods. Within an hour, I had produced a sample that looked more like fine art than industrial textile. How in hell did you do that? He examined the fabric, running weathered fingers across its surface. This could revolutionize everything we produce here. Word spread quickly through Spokane's close-knit craft community. By afternoon, 3 different shop owners had visited the mill, each wanting to commission pieces using my mysterious techniques. Audrey arrived just as I was finishing my shift, her blonde hair windswept from riding her bicycle across town. The sight of her made my pulse quicken, memories of the previous night flooding back with vivid clarity. Ready to see what inspiration looks like? She asked, eyes sparkling with anticipation. Her studio had been transformed. New pottery pieces lined the shelves, their glazes reflecting the same color gradients I had been weaving. The rich blues flowed into deep purples, creating surfaces that seemed to shift in the lamplight. You've been busy, I said, admiring a vase that incorporated geometric patterns eerily, similar to designs I knew wouldn't become popular until the 1990s. Your textile work sparked something. She lifted one of the pieces, turning it slowly. Look at these patterns. They feel like they belong to the future. The irony was almost too much to bear. Sometimes the future arrives earlier than expected. What do you mean? I deflected the question by showing her the fabric samples I had brought. Her reaction was immediate and electric. These are extraordinary. The way the colors blend, the dimensional quality, it's like nothing I've ever seen. They're inspired by your paintings. She looked up sharply. My paintings inspire you? Everything about you inspires me. The admission hung between us, more intimate than any physical touch. She set down the pottery and moved closer, her paint-stained fingers reaching for my face. Show me, she whispered. This time, when we came together, it was with the confidence of lovers who had already mapped each other's desires. We explored the connection between creativity and passion, finding that our artistic visions merged as seamlessly as our bodies. Later, as we worked side by side in comfortable silence, I weaving intricate patterns while she shaped clay into flowing forms. I felt a contentment I had never known in my original time. Her presence grounded me in ways I hadn't thought possible. Margaret wants to meet with us tomorrow, Audrey mentioned, glazing a small bowl with careful strokes. She's been getting inquiries about our work. Inquiries? Apparently, word is spreading beyond Spokane. Some gallery owner from Seattle heard about the mysterious weaver and her artist partner. The word sent warmth spreading through my chest. It was more than a business arrangement, more than a creative collaboration. It was recognition of something deeper, something that felt permanent despite the impossible circumstances of my presence here. Are you comfortable with that level of attention? She paused in her glazing, considering the question. With you beside me, I think I'm ready for anything. That evening, Margaret's cafe became an impromptu exhibition space. She had arranged our combined pieces throughout the small restaurant, creating an intimate gallery that showcased our complementary talents. "This partnership is remarkable," she said, refilling our coffee cups. "Your techniques, Evelyn, combined with Audrey's vision, it's creating something entirely new." Other patrons moved through the space, examining our work with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for established masters. An older woman in pearls spent 15 minutes studying one of my tapestries, while a young couple debated the merits of Audrey's color choices. "We did this," Audrey whispered, her hand finding mine under the table. "Together." As the evening progressed, we fielded questions about our methods and inspirations, carefully crafting answers that revealed enough to satisfy curiosity while protecting the impossible truth of my origins. Audrey handled the interrogation with grace, deflecting when necessary, supporting my explanations with artistic perspective that made everything seem perfectly natural. By closing time, we had received 3 commission requests and an invitation to display our work at a holiday market in downtown Seattle. Walking back to her apartment through the quiet streets, our shoulders bumping companionably, I felt the strange sensation of time settling around me like a comfortable blanket. The anxiety of displacement was fading, replaced by something far more dangerous. The feeling that I belonged here, in this era, with this woman. "What are you thinking about?" Audrey asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "How quickly things can change. 3 days ago, I was alone in a new place, uncertain about everything. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." She stopped walking and turned to face me, streetlights casting warm shadows across her features. "Good. Because I have no intention of letting you go." The promise in those words wrapped around my heart like a binding spell. Whatever forces had brought me across time had given me something precious. A love that transcended the impossible. A partnership that created art from the marriage of past and future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, walking through 1975 Spokane, with Audrey's hand in mine, I felt truly home for the first time in any century. The eviction notice appeared on Margaret's cafe door like a death sentence printed on official letterhead. I stood beside Audrey in the early morning cold, reading the corporate language that spelled out our worst fears. Sterling Development Corporation, I read aloud. 60 days notice for demolition and redevelopment. Audrey's jaw tightened as she scanned the document. They want to tear down the entire block. Margaret's cafe, my studio, the bookshop, everything. For what? A shopping mall. The words came out like a curse. Progress, they call it. Margaret emerged from her cafe, coffee pot in hand and fury in her eyes. They showed up yesterday with surveys and cameras, treating our neighborhood like it was already empty. The news spread through our small artistic community like wildfire. By afternoon, Margaret's cafe had become an impromptu war room. Store owners, artists, and longtime residents crowded around mismatched tables, their voices rising in anger and desperation. "My family has owned the bookshop for 30 years, said Mrs. Chen, Margaret's sister-in-law. "Where are we supposed to go?" "They're offering buyouts at half the property value," added Tom from the frame shop. "It's highway robbery." I listened to the discussions, my mind racing with knowledge from decades of future development battles. These people needed organization, media attention, legal pressure, strategies that wouldn't be common practice for another decade. "We need to fight this systematically," I said, standing to address the room. "Scattered complaints won't work. We need unified action." "What kind of action?" Margaret asked. "First, research the development company, find their weak points. Second, organize the media campaign. Third, explore legal challenges." Audrey looked at me with surprise and admiration. "You sound like you've done this before." "I've seen what works and what doesn't," I replied carefully. That evening, Robert Sterling himself appeared at Margaret's cafe, his expensive suit looking out of place among the worn wooden tables. He was younger than I had expected, probably late 30s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from never hearing the word no. "I understand there are concerns about the development," he said, addressing the room with practiced charm. "I'm here to listen." "Listen to this," Margaret shot back. This neighborhood has character, history, community. You can't just erase that for profit. Mrs. Chen, I appreciate the sentiment, but progress requires difficult choices. The new shopping center will bring jobs, tax revenue, modern conveniences, and destroy everything that makes this place special, Audrey interjected, her artist's passion flaring. Do you even see what you're demolishing? Sterling's eyes lingered on Audrey longer than necessary, and I felt a flash of protective anger. I see buildings that have outlived their usefulness, but I also see opportunity for compromise. The way he looked at her made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about development. He was the type of man who took what he wanted, regardless of consequences. What kind of compromise? Tom asked suspiciously. Perhaps certain establishments could be incorporated into the new design. Selective preservation, you might call it. The offer was clearly aimed at dividing us, creating competition between businesses for survival. I stood up, moving slightly closer to Audrey. All or nothing, I said firmly. This community survives together or not at all. Sterling's smile never wavered, but his eyes turned cold. That's an interesting position, Miss Moore. Very idealistic. I hope you understand the practical realities of your situation. After he left, the room erupted in arguments. Some wanted to negotiate, others demanded total resistance. I watched the community fracturing exactly as Sterling had intended. We need to make a decision, Margaret said, calling for quiet. Do we fight this as one unit, or do we let them pick us off individually? The vote was close, but solidarity won. We would resist the development together, whatever the cost. Later that night, in Audrey's studio, we processed the day's events while working on our respective crafts. The threat had brought new urgency to everything, including our relationship. I can't lose this place, she said, shaping clay with more force than necessary. This studio, this neighborhood, it's where I discovered who I am. It's where we discovered each other. She looked up from her pottery wheel, clay-covered hands still moving. You were amazing today. The way you organized everyone, saw through Sterling's manipulation. Where did that come from? I couldn't tell her the truth about witnessing similar battles in my original time. Instead, I moved behind her chair, placing my hands over hers on the clay. Sometimes you find strength you didn't know you had. The pottery wheel slowed as she leaned back against me. I'm scared, Evelyn, not just about losing the studio, but about what this fight might do to us. What do you mean? Pressure changes people, reveals who they really are underneath. I turned her chair so she faced me, our knees touching. Then let it reveal this. I kissed her with all the passion and certainty I felt, tasting clay dust and determination on her lips. She responded with equal fervor, her hands leaving muddy prints on my shirt as she pulled me closer. The threat to our community had crystallized something essential. This woman, this love. This life we were building together was worth fighting for with everything I had. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled with renewed confidence. Whatever happens, at least we know what we're fighting to protect. Everything, I whispered against her lips. We're fighting to protect everything. Outside, the neighborhood settled into uneasy sleep, while Sterling's machinery of destruction moved forward. But in Audrey's studio, surrounded by our combined artistic vision, I felt the strength that would carry us through the battle ahead. The community center transformed into our headquarters overnight. Tables laden with protest signs, petition sheets and coffee cups created organized. Chaos that reminded me of campaign offices from decades in the future. Using knowledge I couldn't explain, I set up communication networks that impressed even our most skeptical neighbors. How do you know so much about organizing? Asked Tom, watching me coordinate phone trees with military precision. You pick things up when you travel enough, I deflected, focusing on the task board I had created. Audrey emerged from the art supply corner, her blonde hair tied back, with paint-streaked ribbons, carrying an armload of poster boards. The propaganda department is ready for action. Her artwork had taken on new urgency. Bold graphics demanded attention while clever slogans crystallized our message. She had an intuitive grasp of visual communication that wouldn't become mainstream for another decade. These are brilliant, Margaret said, examining a poster that showed Sterling development as a monster consuming small buildings. Where do we put them? Everywhere, I replied. Store windows, telephone poles, bus stops. We flood the city with our message before Sterling can control the narrative. Our strategy sessions stretched late into the night, fueled by Margaret's endless supply of coffee and pastries. The shared purpose had bonded our diverse group into something resembling a family, united against a common threat. "The city council meets next Thursday," announced Mrs. Chen, consulting her notebook. "We need to pack that room." "I'll handle media outreach," I volunteered, already mentally composing press releases using techniques that wouldn't be standard practice for years. Audrey squeezed my shoulder. "You're amazing at this. Like you were born to lead." If only she knew how many similar battles I had witnessed in my original timeline. The patterns were always the same. Corporate power versus community spirit, money versus meaning. But knowing the future gave me dangerous advantages. During our supply runs, Audrey and I found stolen moments of intimacy between the urgency of activism. Loading poster supplies into her truck, our hands would brush and linger. Planning demonstration routes became opportunities for whispered conversations in darkened doorways. "Sometimes I forget there's a world beyond this fight," she murmured one evening as we walked home through the quiet streets. "The fight is temporary. What we're building together isn't." She stopped walking and pulled me into the shadow between streetlights. "Show me something permanent." Our kisses had evolved beyond desperate hunger into something deeper, more nuanced. I traced the line of her jaw while she threaded fingers through my hair, both of us, savoring the connection that had become our anchor in the storm of uncertainty. Back at her studio, we made love with the intensity of people who understood how precious and fragile happiness could be. Every touch carried weight, every whispered endearment felt like a promise we might not be able to keep. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets that smelled like turpentine and possibility, we talked about futures we might not be allowed to have. "If we lose," she said quietly, "if Sterling wins and destroys everything, where do we go?" "We don't lose," I replied with confidence born from knowledge she couldn't understand. "But even if the worst happens, we go together. That's what matters." "Together," she repeated, like she was testing the word's strength. The next morning brought unexpected reinforcement. A reporter from the Spokane Daily Chronicle arrived at Margaret's cafe, drawn by our grassroots campaign that had begun attracting regional attention. "Tell me about this battle between community and development," she said. Notepad ready. I had coached everyone on messaging, drawing from media training that wouldn't exist for decades. Our talking points were consistent, compelling, and designed to generate sympathy without appearing overly organized. "This isn't about stopping progress," Margaret explained perfectly. "This is about ensuring progress serves people, not just profit." Audrey displayed her protest art while I provided statistics about community impact that I claimed to have researched in the library. The reporter seemed impressed by our sophistication. "You've organized quite a resistance in very little time," she observed. "When people care about something deeply, they find ways to make their voices heard," Audrey replied. That afternoon brought news that changed everything. Tom burst into our headquarters carrying a copy of the business section, his face flushed with excitement. "Sterling Development is under investigation by the state attorney general," he announced. "Securities fraud, bribery allegations, the whole damn thing." The room erupted in cheers, but I felt a chill of recognition. This was too convenient, too perfectly timed. In my experience, desperate corporations often became more dangerous when cornered. "We can't celebrate yet," I warned. "Investigations take time, and Sterling won't go quietly." My caution proved prophetic. That evening, as Audrey and I worked late in her studio, we heard glass breaking in the alley below. Racing to the window, we saw two figures disappearing into the shadows, leaving behind the remains of several car windows. "Intimidation tactics," I said grimly. "They're trying to scare us." "Are you scared?" She considered the question seriously, then pulled me away from the window and into her arms. "Only of losing you." The kiss that followed was fierce, desperate, filled with all the uncertainty our situation carried. We held each other in the lamplight while sirens wailed in the distance, both understanding that our fight had entered a more dangerous phase. But as I felt her heart beating against mine, I knew we had built something stronger than fear, something that would survive whatever Sterling threw at us next. Our love had become the foundation for everything else we were fighting to protect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight we had each other, and sometimes that was enough to change the world. Sterling's counterattack began with whispers and ended with betrayal that cut deeper than any broken windows. The rumors started subtly. Questions about my sudden appearance in Spokane, my mysterious background, the uncanny accuracy of my organizing strategies. "Someone's been asking questions about you," Margaret warned during our morning coffee ritual. "Sterling's people have been visiting the textile mill, the boarding house, even the library." I felt the familiar chill of exposure. "What kind of questions?" "Where you came from, how you learned those advanced weaving techniques, why your references seem impossible to verify." Audrey looked up from her sketches, concern creasing her features. "Is there something we should know?" The weight of my secret pressed against my chest like a physical force. How could I explain that I had traveled from 50 years in the future? That my knowledge came from living through decades they hadn't experienced yet? "My past is complicated," I said carefully, "but it doesn't change who I am now or what I'm fighting for." The investigation intensified when Tom arrived with devastating news. Sterling's offered to preserve 3 businesses if the rest of us accept his buyouts. He's trying to split the coalition. "Which 3?" Margaret asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "The bookshop, the frame shop, and Morrison Textiles." The strategic brilliance was clear. Sterling had identified our most influential voices and was attempting to buy their silence. The offer created immediate division as business owners faced impossible choices between survival and solidarity. Mrs. Chen was the first to crack. "I have to think about my family's future," she announced at our evening meeting. 30 years we've invested in the bookshop. Sterling's preservation offer might be our only chance. "If you take his deal, you're legitimizing the destruction of everything else," I argued, perhaps too forcefully. "Easy for you to say," Tom shot back. "You've been here, 2 weeks? Some of us have decades invested in this place." The accusation stung because it contained uncomfortable truth. I was an outsider, despite feeling more at home here than anywhere in my original timeline. Audrey stood up, her artist's passion flaring. "Evelyn has fought harder for this community than anyone. Her commitment isn't measured in years, but in action." "Her commitment to what exactly?" Tom pressed. "What do we really know about her? She appears out of nowhere with suspicious knowledge and revolutionary techniques. Maybe Sterling's right to be asking questions." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Doubt poisoned the atmosphere we had worked so hard to create. "Are you suggesting I'm working for Sterling?" I asked quietly. "I'm suggesting we don't know who you're working for." Margaret tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Our unified community had fractured along lines of suspicion and self-interest. Later that night, Audrey and I walked through downtown Spokane in heavy silence. The streets felt different now, charged with uncertainty that went beyond our development battle. "Tom's questions don't matter to me," she said finally. "But I need to hear the truth from you." We stopped beside the river, moonlight reflecting off water that had flowed through this valley for millennia. The permanence of the landscape made our human struggles seem both urgent and temporary. "The truth is more complicated than you can imagine. Try me." I stared into the water, weighing impossible choices. Telling her might cost me her love. Not telling her was already creating distance between us. "What if I told you I wasn't from this time, that I came here from somewhere you couldn't understand?" She studied my face in the moonlight, searching for deception or madness. "I'd ask you to explain what that means." "It means I know things I shouldn't know. It means my past is literally impossible to verify because it hasn't happened yet. It means everything about me is more than complicated." The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. "Are you telling me you're from the future?" "I'm telling you I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone, and that love is the only truth that matters." She was quiet for a long time, processing implications that challenged everything she thought she knew about reality. The weaving techniques, the organizing strategies, the way you see patterns. Before they develop, it all makes sense if you're telling the truth. "Do you believe me?" "I believe that you believe it. And I believe that whatever brought you here brought you to me for a reason." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by deeper fear. "And if the community finds out?" If Sterling uses this against us, then we face it together. She pulled me into her arms beside the flowing river, and when she kissed me, it carried promises of acceptance that transcended the impossible circumstances of our love. I have conditions, she whispered against my lips. Anything. No more secrets between us. Whatever happens with Sterling, whatever questions people ask, we face everything as partners. Partners, I agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. But even as I held her in the moonlight, I knew our troubles were far from over. Sterling had succeeded in fracturing our community, and my mysterious origins would provide him with dangerous ammunition. The battle for our neighborhood had become personal in ways that threatened not just our homes and businesses but the love we had discovered in the shadow of destruction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight we had crossed a threshold of trust that made us stronger than the sum of our individual secrets. The betrayal came on a Tuesday morning with the sound of heavy machinery rumbling down our street. I watched from Audrey's studio window as bulldozers positioned themselves like metal predators around the perimeter of our block, their yellow hulks gleaming in the pale sunlight. They can't start demolition yet, Audrey said, joining me at the window. The city council hasn't voted. Sterling's not waiting for permission. My knowledge of future corporate tactics told me exactly what was happening. Create a fait accompli. Force the community to react defensively instead of proactively. Make resistance look foolish in the face of inevitable progress. Margaret's Cafe had become our command center again. But the atmosphere was different now. Suspicion and defeat hung in the air like smoke. Tom avoided eye contact, while Mrs. Chen clutched legal papers with shaking hands. The preservation offer is still on the table, she announced. Sterling's lawyer says if we don't decide by noon, he withdraws everything. It's divide and conquer, I said. Classic intimidation. Easy words from someone with nothing to lose, Tom muttered. The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I could theoretically disappear as mysteriously as I had arrived, leaving behind heartbreak but no material losses. Everyone else had invested decades in businesses and relationships that Sterling threatened to erase. She has everything to lose, Audrey shot back. This community, this life we've built together. It matters as much to her as anyone. Built together over what, 3 weeks? Tom's skepticism had hardened into open hostility. How do we know she's not reporting back to Sterling about our strategies? The accusation hit like physical violence. I understood Tom's desperation, but watching my neighbors turn against each other felt like witnessing the slow death of everything we had fought to preserve. Enough, Margaret said quietly. If we're going to lose, let's not lose to each other. At 11:30, with demolition equipment idling outside like mechanical vultures, I made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to expose Sterling, I announced to the diminished group. Corporate fraud, illegal intimidation tactics, everything. With what evidence? Tom asked. Evidence I can obtain. That night, using skills learned from watching too many espionage movies in my original timeline, I broke into Sterling Development's temporary offices in downtown Spokane. The security was laughably primitive by 2024 standards. A simple lock and no electronic surveillance. Inside, I photographed documents that revealed a web of corruption spanning multiple developments across the state. Bribery payments disguised as consulting fees, illegal environmental shortcuts, falsified community impact studies. Sterling's operation was even dirtier than I had suspected. But as I prepared to leave with evidence that could destroy him, I heard voices in the hallway. The investigation is getting too close. Sterling's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. We need to accelerate the timeline. What about the community resistance? Another voice, younger, nervous. Let them have their little protest tomorrow. Once the bulldozers start, sentiment won't matter. My blood froze as I realized what he meant. Sterling planned to begin demolition during our planned demonstration, creating a dangerous confrontation that could result in injuries or arrests. I escaped through a back window, stolen documents tucked inside my jacket, and raced through empty streets to Audrey's studio. We have to move the demonstration, I gasped, bursting through her door. Sterling's planning to start demolition while we're protesting. She looked up from her easel where she was working on what appeared to be her masterpiece. A massive painting of our neighborhood as a living, breathing organism. Root systems connected buildings while artistic energy flowed between studios and shops. What are you talking about? I explained about the break-in and what I had overheard, watching her face shift from surprise to determination. So we give them exactly what they don't expect, she said, setting down her brush. Instead of avoiding the confrontation, we embrace it. Audrey, that's dangerous. Everything worth fighting for is dangerous. She pulled out her phone and began making calls, rallying our fractured community for one final stand. Her passion was contagious, cutting through the despair that had been consuming us. This is bigger than our neighborhood now, she told each caller. This is about whether communities have the right to exist against corporate pressure. By dawn, word had spread beyond Spokane. Regional news crews were setting up while activists from surrounding cities arrived to join our cause. What Sterling had intended as our quiet defeat was becoming a very public battle. Standing beside Audrey as the sun rose over our threatened neighborhood, I felt the strange sensation of history pivoting around us. This moment, this choice, would echo through decades I had already lived. Are you ready for this? She asked, taking my hand. With you, I'm ready for anything. The bulldozers started their engines as protesters gathered in the street. Sterling stood beside his machinery, confident in his power and timeline. He had no idea that the evidence in my possession would soon expose his entire operation. But first, we had to survive the next few hours. Audrey squeezed my hand as we walked toward the confrontation that would determine our future. Behind us, her painting caught the morning light, like a promise that beauty and community could triumph over corporate greed. The battle for our neighborhood was about to begin in earnest, and this time I knew exactly how it would end. The confrontation unfolded exactly as I had foreseen, but with a twist that surprised even my future-informed perspective. When Sterling's bulldozers roared to life, our protesters didn't scatter in fear. Instead, they linked arms and began singing, their voices rising above the mechanical thunder. Audrey stood beside me in the front row, her blonde hair whipping in the wind created by the massive machines. She had painted her face with streaks of blue and gold, war paint for an artist's battle. This is it, she whispered. Whatever happens next defines everything. The first bulldozer approached our human chain, its operator clearly uncomfortable. With the optics of crushing peaceful protesters on camera, regional news crews captured every moment as he hesitated, engine idling. That's when I made my move. Robert Sterling, I called out, stepping forward with the stolen documents clutched in my hand. Before you destroy this community, maybe your investors should see these. I held up the evidence of his corporate fraud, photographs of documents that detailed years of illegal practices. The news cameras swiveled toward me as reporters sensed a developing story. Sterling's confident expression cracked. I don't know what you think you have, but falsified environmental reports, bribery payments disguised as consulting fees, illegal demolition permits. I read from the documents with the authority of someone who had seen these tactics repeated across decades. Should I continue? The crowd murmured as they realized what was happening. Our community resistance had uncovered actual criminal behavior that went far beyond our neighborhood dispute. Those documents are stolen, Sterling stammered, his polished demeanor finally showing cracks. The truth doesn't become less true because of how it's obtained. A reporter pushed forward with a microphone. Mr. Sterling, can you comment on these allegations? What followed was beautiful chaos. Sterling's carefully orchestrated demolition became a media circus as reporters demanded answers about the corruption charges. The bulldozer operators, uncertain of their legal position, shut down their engines. Within hours, the state attorney general's office had issued a temporary restraining order halting all Sterling development projects pending investigation. Our neighborhood was safe, at least temporarily. That evening, Margaret's Cafe became an impromptu victory celebration. The community that had fractured under pressure came together again, bonded by shared triumph over seemingly impossible odds. How did you know where to find those documents? Tom asked, his earlier suspicions replaced by grudging admiration. Sometimes you have to take risks for what matters, I replied, not entirely answering his question. Audrey found me later on the fire escape outside her studio, looking out over the neighborhood we had helped save. The lights and windows below represented lives and dreams that would continue because we had fought. "You never told me you were a cat burglar," she said, settling beside me on the narrow metal platform. "There's a lot you don't know about me. I know everything I need to know." She took my hand, fingers intertwining with mine. "I know you traveled across impossible distances to find me. I know you risked everything to save our community. I know you love me enough to break laws and face danger. And that's enough? It's everything." When she kissed me this time, it tasted like victory and possibility. The kiss deepened as we celebrated not just our community's survival, but the love that had anchored us through the storm. 6 months later, Sterling Development had collapsed under federal investigation, while our neighborhood had transformed into a thriving arts district. The publicity from our battle had attracted artists, galleries, and tourists who appreciated authentic, creative community. Audrey and I had opened a combined studio and workshop where her pottery complemented my revolutionary textile work. The space buzzed with activity as students learned techniques that bridged traditional craftsmanship with innovations that wouldn't become mainstream for decades. "We did something impossible," she said one evening as we closed shop together. "We saved a community and built a life that feels like magic. The best kind of magic, the kind that's real." Our apartment above the studio had become a sanctuary filled with joint artistic projects and the accumulated debris of shared life. Audrey's paintings covered the walls while my tapestries provided texture and warmth. Standing in our shared space, surrounded by evidence of the life we had created together, I finally understood why time had brought me to this moment, this place, this woman. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met?" she asked, curled against my side on the couch we had rescued from a thrift store. "Never. Because meeting you feels inevitable, like the universe arranged everything specifically to bring us together. Even your mysterious past? Especially my mysterious past." She tilted her head to study my face in the lamplight. "Will you ever tell me the whole truth about where you came from?" "Someday. When you're ready to believe that love can transcend time itself." I already believe that. The kiss that followed sealed promises we had been making to each other since that first night in her studio. Promises about building a future together, about facing whatever challenges awaited, about loving each other through whatever transformations time might bring. Later, wrapped in each other's arms while Spokane settled into peaceful sleep. Around us, I marveled at the strange journey that had brought me home. I had traveled across decades to find a love that felt timeless, crossing impossible distances to discover that sometimes the future arrives through the past. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new opportunities, to create beauty from the marriage of tradition and innovation. But tonight, holding Audrey in our shared bed, while her golden hair caught moonlight from the window, I knew I had found exactly where I belonged. Some journeys through time lead to the place you were always meant to be.